Glyn Hall, big changes in Dakar, and probably the two biggest changes are the two Mr. Dakars who aren't there this year. Stefan Peter Hansel after, what's it, 30 something years, and Glyn Hall after 22 years. I mean, the two of you have had the most impact in Dakar in the last 20 something years. What's it feel like
Well,
being on the island while Dakar's on the go?
well, first of all, Colin, you're very kind, and yeah, I remember Stefan and myself go back a long way to 2002, his first event in a proper car. So yeah, little bit of nostalgia there for sure. What's it like? It's quite strange, I must admit, but it's nice also watching from afar, having a bit of a different perspective on it all.
It's quite interesting. Now you see how we fans try and follow this thing, and it's not easy, is it?
It's not easy at all, and having some inside info from the past 20 odd years, as you say, does help understand quite a lot that's going on. And I must say, the ASO website is probably the
Yeah.
best it's ever been. So it was quite an exciting day, I think, really, couple of days.
Well, I think today was, in my mind, was the day that the big guys came out and really put their, laid it all out. But before we get there, it's not just the fact that you spent many years with Toyota and Nissan. These names, Glyn, Colin McRae, Ari Vatanen, Stefan Peter Hansel, Leroy Poulter, Carlos Sainz, Janil de Villiers, Fernando Alonso, Nasser Al Attiyah, Duncan Foss, Christoph Hollowitz. These are guys
Yes.
that came to drive for you, that wanted to drive for you. Um, it's like history, huge.
Yeah, it is great, I must admit. There's one name that's short there, really, is Carlos Sainz, who was desperate to finish his career, shall we say, in a Toyota. And we spoke long and hard about it. And I've really got a lot of time for Carlos. He's a great guy. But yeah, there's when you read that list out, it's even, yeah, surprises me listening to it again. You know, it's just felt like part of the job, really.
Well, the earth in Egypt is still shuddering from the impacts of Ari Vatanen and, in particular, Colin McRae. The design of that Nissan at the time was absolutely incredible that they could walk away from those cars.
Absolutely, yeah. The strength was good, and of course, Colin had a massive accident, and actually phoned afterwards to say thank you for for such a strong car, and I have to pass that kudos to the team as well. At the time, we always wanted to be safe, and Kenzuro Shinazuka was the first one to have an absolutely massive crash in 2003. 172 k's an hour off the end of a dune, foot flat, and he was a little bit injured afterwards, but more when he got back to the hospital than he thought. But yeah, the cars were strong, and we tried to keep that throughout all of the history.
Those, from those early days of the Nissan Buckies built in Kyalami through to what we see now, essentially an evolution design of and different iterations from both from a chassis and a drivetrain point of view, has left probably a massive change, a lasting change in the pathway of what is now the ultimate category in Dakar. And you've had
Well,
a
actually, Colin,
close
I think
relationship.
you're going to be quite surprised that the car that we launched as a team in 2003 changed the face of Dakar at that time. The mid-engine, especially the layout, trying to get all of the center of mass, in the right place. And today's cars are very much like that, fair
Yeah.
play. And there's actually one part on the current car which is exactly the same that came from that 2003 Nissan. So I
What
think you
part
might be
is that, Glenn?
surprised about that. It's the one of the shafts that go from the gearbox to the front diff. Well,
That's
at the time, yeah, when we built the current T1 Plus, or should we call it the IMA car? That was a shaft that we still had 6 or 8 in stock at the time. And I thought, oh, let's try and use this and see how we go. And there was no need to change it.
Always
So,
maximizing the budget.
absolutely, when, we were always up against it budget wise. I think that the great thing was last year we found out some incredible facts with Janelle bumping into one of the chief Audi men who he knew back from the VW days. Bottom line,
Mm.
the Audis ran for 368 million rand per year per car for 3 years. So that is just a figure that is absolute dream. And of course, we beat them 2-1 and for a fraction of just one car's budget for 1 year.
There was something that you always managed to do was to bring out a big gun on a small budget. What are the, if you could think back and give some advice to some of the smaller teams, the two things that they should look at in trying to make the budget go longer?
Well, I think you've got to be very aware of what the budget needs to be. So you can't start from absolutely nothing, that's for sure. But don't let it daunt you. Sometimes too much money could also be a distraction. It gives you too many opportunities. You need a lot of people and a lot of skills. But certainly you need a budget to make stuff and test stuff. That's where the big costs come, is testing. So if you can get it 80% right first time,
Mm.
you cut your budget to a fraction. And that's what we always try to do. And we had really good guys around. And, that was part of my job, is to try and see what the future was going to be and look at all the other cars, take it in, don't follow, but really take it to heart and see what doesn't work or why something works, and that's where you save a huge amount of money.
You work in that, looking at the future and mapping out the future. You work pretty closely with the FIA in, some say, guiding them a little bit more than, well, doing what any top class team principal does is getting the rules to work in your favor. Looking
Ah, it,
forward,
it
looking
was more than that, Colin. This T1 Plus project, which I threw my life and soul into, I thought the sport needed it for the future.
yeah,
And at the time we did it, it really needed it because we were on the brink of losing big sponsors to carry on, such as Michelin, who are, you can't have 160 punctures on a rally and a team and expect the tire manufacturer, one of the biggest on the planet, to accept it, all the negative publicity. So there was big motivating factors, and that gave me a lot of background strength, shall we say, uh, to go forward and say we have to change this. We've got to change it, and it was quite easy to persuade a lot of the other teams to go hand in hand. Not initially, of course.
mm.
They always thought that we had a big agenda behind it, but I didn't really. 50% or more of it was for the sport, and 50% was in my heart. It's what we really needed to do to get everything level and equal and grow the sport into the future. And
And
it's worked.
now we see Ford, Toyota, Dacia, Mini, all fighting out properly on. Let's go to talk about this level playing field and in particular all the noise around the torque meter. I'm a little
Sure.
bit dumb or non-understanding. Let's put it this way. What is the torque meter? How does it work, and what does it do?
Okay, so let's just look at the past 15 years, or 12 years from when we entered with Toyota with the Hilux alone. I fought tooth and nail with the restrictor against the diesel. I think Janelle should have won 2 Dakars during that period easily. We were at a big power disadvantage. So that was always in the back of my mind. And then when the turbo engines became, how could we couldn't avoid it, shall we say, as a discipline. I really pushed for that so that we could get rid of the restrictor as early as possible and try and get parity with the diesel engine. In the process, of course, um, everybody was skeptical. The normally aspirated engines needed a place, but they were still with a restrictor. But the turbo engines came, we reinforced it. I fought hard in the beginning because the limit was 3 litre and Toyota only had a 3.5. So I had to fight pretty hard to get the level, the capacity level increased. And then they came up with a strategy on how to run the engines. Now, at the time, there was one very, very clever guy inside the FIA who unfortunately had to leave there. I shan't name him, but something to do with the Ferrari in F1 debacle. And he had to leave. And with him went a lot of the initial, should we say, technical insight into equalizing the engines based on the performance architecture of the engine, the production performance architecture of the engine. In other words, how much the production engines produced and how they were built and what certain parameters the engines were. He thought that he could do equalize all of the engines without even going to the dyno. Anyway, he left. And then a new strategy came up based a little bit more on GT3, where all the engines had to go, turbo engines had to be homologated with quite a lot of paperwork, which we didn't want in this discipline, but it was quite a lot of paperwork. Go to the FIA and get the engines adapted to a preset power curve, loosely based on a 5 litre normally aspirated engine.
Yeah.
And that's how it started, Colin.
And then within that torque curve that was supposed homologated for everybody, all the very clever people that you team principals employ look for the wording and then the gray areas and make some stuff happen,
Ah, absolutely, Grant.
that's what motorsport's about. It's if you don't
Absolutely.
push the limit, you're not playing the game. So
Colin, absolutely. There's a loose term to describe that. It's not what the rules are, it's what the words say. Shall
yes,
we let it at that? And Adrian Newey was probably one of the best guys at that in F1. And you have to really sit down and think very, very carefully when you read a set of rules. And some of my problem in when we raced over the years in touring cars, I helped write the rules, which is the worst thing that you can ever do because you know the intention of them. And I missed something in touring cars that BMW in Germany picked up so easily. And it was a position of the restrictor.
yeah.
We said there had to be a restrictor on each cylinder, but we didn't say where they had to be. So BMW picked all four of them out of the inlet and put them together. And we wondered why we didn't win the next race. But anyway, we managed to sort that out.
There's
So,
no
yes,
line in the rule book that says the intent is it. This is just what it is. So now you've got all
you
sorts of powers going all over the place, and
well, it perhaps wasn't as bad as people say. However, there were some variables, Colin, very important ones, and that is the fuel that the cars are tested with on the dyno. So they all get tested with a spec fuel, which happened to be ELF Core 50, 102 octane with a very specific energy level. However, you could run a sustainable fuel that met the regulation, and then you go back to the dyno and try again. And that's where a few variables came in, and it started to get a little bit delicate, shall we say. And then the FIA said, we want to measure the performance of the cars outside of the dyno, outside of the fuels, and we want to use the GT3 principle and F1, which is measuring the torque of the engine after or somewhere in the transmission. And when you've got the torque, when you've got the speed, you have the power. And
yes,
that's what the story is. So they introduced a thing called the torque meter, which is a magnetic based device that goes around a shaft, which twists, and it measures the difference in magnetism, for want of a better word, and from that it calculates the power very accurately, actually, enough in Formula One so that on a Monday after a race, they know exactly how much power everybody was using at any time during the race or practice, etc.
And
And
that's
and
all
that
good and well while you've got a relatively linear tar to traction surface or tire to traction surface interface. Put that on some of the
100%.
GT3 cars, which is less than a Formula One, you've got some problems. Now go and put that onto the cross country cars.
Yeah.
And
So we were involved. So it went like this. In the beginning, when the fuels came up, um, I was very much for the torque meter. I thought the concept was good. We were not able to put the torque meter in the clutch shaft, which is where the FIA wanted it. So for initial test, we all decided it was going to go into the gearbox. Um, then all of this took much longer than we thought. By the time we'd tested it, it was probably too late and it's in the wrong place. It should have been on the clutch shaft, but everything took longer than it should have done. And last year in the Dakar, we ran it for the first time. We looked at the data and the readings, gave it back to the FIA, and we could immediately see problems. There was as I predicted, to the guys in America who we had long discussions with, there was a lot of wind up, that is stored energy or potential energy in the drivetrain when the wheels come off the ground. And these drivers, they leave their foot flat out on the floor. So when the cars land, there's all this stored potential energy which is released, and that plays havoc with the not only with the torque meter but the readings, both positive and negative, because as the wheels hit the ground, the shafts wind up, then they've got to unwind. So you've got a negative torque going down the shafts. So
so
the
that,
FIA worked, really hard to try and mathematically remove this.
and you've now got all these different spikes that come in. If I put some smoothing things in, your rocket scientists who get very clever with computer work with all the rest of it, and you've got some debate again.
Yeah, so I think the debates were pretty, and I mean, from early year, I wasn't involved in a lot of those discussions with the FIA from mid-year on, shall we say, or just before then. But they'd committed to it and they had to fix it. So they took some clever mathematicians and engineers, worked around it, and they came up with what's called an algorithm, which is a nice word for a complicated formula to throw peak values away, but you always throw data away when you do that. But it seemed to make everybody pretty happy in Morocco, and that's what's been used in Dakar. So let's see how it goes.
Should we just leave the discussion and just focus on the racing from now on? And what
Yeah,
what happens?
but
It's
but
too
the,
late.
but the bottom line is, so I supported it in the beginning. Then when I saw the data, I didn't support it, and I wrote a whole paper to the FIA describing how I thought that all the vehicles should be monitored, which would be easy all over the world. But and the paper was well received with a lot of, or a dossier, as it's called in French, was well received by a lot of the teams. But I was a little bit late, and I should have woken up earlier with it, and perhaps that might have been the future. But
What is
then,
that way, Glyn? What's the in a nutshell, or if you could put something like that in a nutshell?
well, I thought that there should have been an air restrictor to control the amount of air going to the engines. Then each engine with its capacity had to have its own boost limit, all right, on top of the restrictor. So you need a fairly big restrictor, not a small one, and then try and balance the normally aspirated engine to that, shall we say, and go from there. But it it doesn't take into account the fuel, so that's a negative. Currently, you can put whatever fuel you like in the cars, and the torque meter will control the engine at any altitude, of course. Remember that. So
Yeah.
I went away from supporting the torque meter to going away from it to then supporting it again because you could use cheap fuel as well if you had enough power in hand, because now the FIA don't care what boost you run, they only care what torque,
Or talk.
the engine has. Then you can calculate the power. But the cost is a little bit high, and that cost needs to come down. Then I think it'll be pretty good.
While we're on the talking about the future, we saw the announcement from Defender coming in with this new class, more based around production vehicles, almost GT3 cross-country cars.
Well, I think it's based around the T2, and I was a little bit involved with that as well
Yeah,
beforehand, and organised a meeting between Jaguar and Toyota in Japan earlier late last year, and Toyota embraced that as well as a company because they want somebody to compete against in T2. And of course, T2 is quite expensive because you have to replace a lot of production parts in a car. These production cars aren't made to go through these rough type of roads and deserts, etc. So they do need some more flexibility, but some rules to control themselves. And Defender coming in offers another piece of competition. Ford have got a vehicle that they could use, but now they're focused, on the ultimate class. So yeah, but it's another manufacturer there. Maybe they'll go up a class. Who knows?
are you happy to see the end of the electrics?
Without question, I fought extremely hard. The cost of the Audi, which I described later, has not no place in cross country.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Perhaps it helped us get T1 Plus going, so that was a positive. But there was no place for that type of car. That the Audi had an advantage on virtually everything because of its of the regulations, with one major exception, was the cost and complexity of it. So, instead of needing 20 people in the pits, they needed 120. So was it green? I don't think so. When you look at all the vehicles and all the people they had compared to what we had, I would think we were a lot more green than that car. But it did the job for Audi at the time. It got us T1 Plus, so it's gone now, and I fought very, very hard to make sure there was no more cars of that type in the future. I was very vocal for that, for the health of the sport going forward.
This year we've got Ford, Dacia, Toyota, Mini, and the privateers. It looks like it could be a very, very close race. What's your read on the race so far, and which teams do you think are the favourites?
So the read on the race so far is pretty much as I thought it would be. Um, I think certainly I don't know all the details of the Hilux this year, but I was convinced last year the Hilux, as I left, the team was the best car we'd ever built, and certainly the best car out there. At that last year, I thought by a country mile we should have won again, but that's a story for another day. So even if that car was the same this year, I still think it would be a winner. And I thought that it would be a race between Nasser and Loeb, certainly for overall honours and certainly inside the team. So that's certainly paid out. But I did think that there would be a Toyota in the mix. And I think tonight there's seven in the top 10 after 1,000, what is it, 200 Ks of stage so far or something. So I think we're pretty close on predictions there. Car looks good. We got great new names: Toby Price, Sam
Yes.
Sutherland. Look at those guys. Remember, you got two co-drivers in that car, proper
And you've
ones.
also bringing in the Australian and American markets into the whole thing, it's absolutely brilliant.
Well, isn't Sam English? I think Sam's English. Could be. I'm only just talking to you. You can cut it
Glenn,
out
never let
later
the
if you
facts
want.
destroy a good
Don't let the
story.
facts spoil a good story, otherwise we'd miss Roger McCleary forever.
Absolutely,
But
you're right. There's an Oz and a Pommy.
at least I was right once.
Yeah.
But NASA shared the car in the Baja 1000 with Toby a couple of years ago, and we were chatting about it. And NASA said, "Well, for him, Toby's a future winner of the Dakar." And how right he was. Look at this, first time out. I mean, good car, good
And
team.
the Dacia with its new Nissan V6, 3-liter V6,
Yeah, I think
quick.
they had to use that engine, or they couldn't. Certainly couldn't use the engine they were using previously. So, but they taught me to take care about that. I do think now that probably a normally aspirated engine is the best engine to have.
From an overall
A
packaging point of view.
overall performance and packaging, Colin. The torque meter will take care of that. Engine simple. The sound will be great, and certainly if the Hilux had the RCF engine, that would be singing a song to the ears of many people. That would be incredible, I'm sure. But yeah, so Malcolm's team has helped promote that type of engine and a little bit of different technology into the Dakar, which is going to be great.
Yeah.
The Dacia looks terrible to me. Does we always had a lot of pressure, and I always liked the cars to be look like a production car. So the Dacia, while it's interesting, doesn't look the part for me, but
It's so
it's
ugly, it's
practical.
almost pretty.
Oh, there you go. You put their nail on the head.
I think the
Yeah.
Ford looks the best and sounds the best. Whether it's the fastest, I doubt it.
I think it might be. I've been looking carefully at some of the footage today. We've had a little bit of time to cruise the YouTube, which I've never done. I'm so always deeply involved in the race, hands on. I never go and have a chance to look. So, from a chassis car point of view, I'd say the Hilux is still the best by a little bit. Then the Ford, then the Mini and the Dacia are similar. Both have got different problems when I'm looking at the cars in various rough terrain. So I think when Yazid gets onto some, should we say, rougher gravel roads, I think Nasser might have his hands full.
It's going to be a super, super interesting race. And talking about interesting things, how's your knee and its reparations?
So I haven't had an operation on it for 20 years after losing my kneecap 41 years ago. The last time I had a arthroscopy, as they call it, was 20 years. So I had one 2 weeks ago, and it was what's known as a dirty knee inside. There was a lot of rubbish left around, and it's feeling pretty good. Thank you. Thank you for the care. Yeah.
And you're doing all the right kind of physiotherapy on the beach and swimming. And I believe red wine, Jeff Mortimer swears by red wine and fixing knees and things.
Well, the surgeon said no because of the what's it called, uric acid and things. So don't want that. But I've got a physio here from Holland who used to do the football teams in Mauritius, just down the road, with the latest laser technology from Europe. So out of the blue, I managed an old South African, Lee Phillips. His
Yeah.
daughter, who's a chiropractor, pointed me towards him, and he's really good. So I'm in safe hands. Swimming starts tomorrow or the next day, I think, in the sea.
Send Lee our regards. We remember when he ran those 350, 360Zs in group, was it Group N or the
Group N
modified
plus.
standard looking
Yeah,
class that everyone
yeah.
ran? Glenn,
Okay.
when you're next back here, we definitely do need to sit down and have a beer and a chat. And I really do appreciate your time and knowledge and sharing that knowledge with us, particularly about the torque meters. It's been absolutely a privilege and an honor to have this chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colin. And let's hope Henk can hang in there. I think he's 2 minutes off the lead, or three
Yeah.
minutes or something, overall lead. And thank goodness that they got his penalty back last night. Last year I was in the car with, shall we say, one of the ex-FIA guys who handles the sporting stuff. It was very interesting for me to spend 10 days or 12 days with. So he managed to get that penalty reversed today. So that was great news for Henk. I don't even know if he knows tonight. I don't know if they're allowed to have the phones out of the cars. Probably not, I
Yes,
would
they
say.
are. But the official bulletin came through. They may have just have left, but they
Yeah.
do have comms tonight in the bivouac. So by now he should know it. But it was a
Yeah, it's
huge
great. And
relief.
um, I think they should have kept it secret. Keep it all a secret. I like David Costera's things. He doesn't want any contact. He's a real old boy racer.
Yeah,
But Guy Buttrell and Dennis, great job. I mean, they were right up there. Janelle had some drama yesterday
yeah.
with something, I think. I don't know all the details, of course. But yeah, looking at that, he was going fast and then slowed. So he was going well again today. So it all looks really good.
Well, we
Yeah.
had our, as one does when you start with an event, your hopes and of who was going to be in the podium. 22 Dakars, finishes 21 in the top 10. What a man. If this is indeed Janelle's last Dakar, I'd like to um, tribute all our shows this year to Janelle, and I would so like to see him on the podium. It would absolutely make my day.
Absolutely, and yeah, no, he understands this race really well and got an enormous respect from everybody and everybody around the world is that they know him, and for sure, I think he's still more than capable of getting onto the podium if he has a clean run, and he's certainly got the skills. There's no question of that.
Yeah, well, we've got another, what is it now? 11 days left, 12 days.
Yeah, there's a long way to go, believe me. And the marathon straight after this is just crazy. I mean, absolutely crazy. So today we saw the performance.
Yeah,
Um, I think tomorrow you will see the absolute performance and fair play to Yazidi. He kept that minutes gap to Nasser all afternoon. I just read earlier on that Loeb had some electrical issue. Christina, and look at the team effort from Dacia.
yeah.
Christina stopping in that roadside service
I mean,
for
that was absolutely
like
phenomenal. I mean,
25 minutes to be the water carrier. You
yeah,
you can see where their team is, and they're going to be going for it. That's for sure. They want to win.
yeah, going to be fascinating.
The chief of that team is an old somebody that I worked with in Ford in 1992. Who it was Ford Europe's competition boss. Can you believe it? So he surfaced last year in the Dakar, tapped me on the shoulder. I said, "Oh, hello, Philip. What are you doing?" "No, no, I'm going to be the new Dacia team director." "Oh, okay."
It's a
So
small world.
it's a small world. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Glyn, thank you so much. We'll see you when you're
Cheers.
back here.
Cheers, guys. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks. Enjoyable.